In this session, we're going to talk about my three most powerful litmus tests for determining relationship potential. What's funny about these is that I accidentally discovered them after doing some reflection recently on what's worked best for me in relationships. And this is relevant to business relationships, friendships, and romantic relationships. Now, the caveat here before sharing these with you is just because these three litmus tests are here and things are valid and it's a green light in all of them, it doesn't necessarily correlate with the longevity of a relationship, of it being long lasting or working out well. At the same time, without these three litmus tests, I'll share this with you because based on experience and a lot of data at this point, if these three litmus tests aren't met out of the gate, I don't believe there's any potential for longevity, right? So these are three things that are important to me. Listening to my voice right now, these are probably going to resonate with you as well. And if I were to distill things down into only three things that I could use as a litmus test for any type of relationship, again, an initial litmus test, here's what these three things would be. And I'll be sharing some examples with you. And as you're listening to the sound of my voice, I want you to think about what these three are going to be for you, right? Because I think a lot of people go into business relationships, friendships, dating, romantic type of relationships without having some clear initial litmus test. And I'm not talking about making a long list of everything that you want and desire, and not necessarily talking about that here. I'm talking about the baseline, fundamental, foundational things that absolutely must be there no matter what, right? When you have this level of clarity, it's that much easier to, one, filter out something. If one of these litmus tests isn't met, I got to be out at this point. Number two, become more attractive to what it is that you want, become a better match for it, and become, as I would say, irresistible to what it is that you'd like. So, first litmus test, and I'll word this a little differently before we jump right in. These are the litmus tests of exploration, right? I believe relationships are one of the most fascinating things in the world. Business and friendship and dating, romance, these are the exploration tests, right? If these litmus tests aren't met, I don't want to explore further, right? And this is the way that I look at things. This is the initial filter, and it's so, so key. The first one, mutual curiosity. Okay. So does the person have a sense of curiosity about me? Do I have a sense of curiosity about the person? My answer 99% of the time is going to be yes. I'm a curious person. I'm very curious about human nature, understanding others. Not everyone is. So I like to see a mutual curiosity. Now, how can we tell that? Typically, the person asks questions. Typically, they're leaning in. You can just see um, there's a level of presence and genuine appreciation. Okay. The next thing is willingness to understand and accommodate to preferences. And what I mean by I don't mean I'm expecting someone or I expect people to bend over backwards for me. There are very clear things, very clear preferences that I have around the way that I want to communicate, around the way that I allocate my time, my bandwidth. So, an example would be if I made a new friend and that friend wanted to talk on the phone every day, we would not explore that friendship much further. That would be something that I would not want to do. Same thing, if I was dating someone they wanted to talk on the phone every day, I'm out. I don't enjoy talking on the phone. I don't talk on the phone with anyone really unless it's like a business conversation, and even those, making those asynchronous, right? Or if I'm talking to family, right? But even then, it's a intentional type of thing. It's not just like, oh, let me talk on the phone all day. I think it's just such a then with certain friends that I don't get to see in person, we talk on the phone once in a while. But again, it's an intentional conversation. I'm intentionally putting that time where I'm focused on that conversation, right? So there's a level of respect there. There's a level of accommodating the preferences. Okay. There's also the point of initial appreciation. We all want to be seen, heard, and understood. So that initial appreciation, that initial curiosity, right? That initial willingness to explore the other person, right? Just seeing that in someone else and also being that. And finally, being respectful, that mutual curiosity. I'm putting all this under the first bucket here, if you will. Under the mutual curiosity is being respectful of the other person's time, boundaries, and values without forcing change or judgment, right? Going into business relationship, friendship, romantic relationships, trying to change someone Terrible, terrible idea, right? So accepting someone as they are, being accepted as you are, right? Again, this is I would put this under mutual curiosity because to me it's we could also call it empathy, but it's just like there's a level of understanding there. Okay. I'm not going to get into business. I'm not going to be close friends with someone. I'm not going to date someone really if there's not these things that I mentioned, this mutual curiosity aspect, right? Because otherwise things can be one way or one person feels like they're chasing the other and it's just not good for anyone, right? So that's number one. Second thing, I'll call it growth consciousness. And this is different than a growth mindset. You may be familiar with, I believe the lady's name is Carol Dweck. I believe that's her name. Could be wrong, but she's got a book about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And in that book, which I have not read, but I've heard like the Cliff Notes version, she makes the distinction that there's people in the world who have more or less a fixed mindset where things are the way they are and they're not seeking growth, and there's people who have a growth mindset. And I think it's very valid. I don't know at this point too many people who have a quote unquote fixed mindset. Again, just a different wavelength, I suppose. And at the same time, this is different than a growth mindset. A growth consciousness to me comes down to someone who wants to expand themselves, expand their consciousness, right? Usually there is a spiritual component to it, no matter what their spiritual religious beliefs are. To me, it's a relationship with God, source, universe, whatever we want to call it, right? Having some sort of relationship there and having some of the same interests, fascinations, and values, right? In that area of growth consciousness. The other thing this comes down to is having a certain level of consciousness. And if you're not familiar with the map of consciousness, I talk about it quite often. My favorite book on this topic is Levels of Energy by Frederick Dodson. David Hawkins also writes about in Power versus Force, letting go. And typically what happens in relationships that last a while, again, in any context, the levels of consciousness are at least in a certain range. What do I mean by that, right? So, according to studies on map of energy, the map of consciousness, we all have a baseline consciousness that we vibrate at, right? And we have different pockets of different things, and different things elicit different energies, certainly, right? And yet we have our baseline level of consciousness, and that can usually be quantified as a number. And again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying there's an exact science to it, but typically, like if you're a very, just give you an easy example. If you're a very positive, very intellectual person, right? Let's just say, okay. And you typically wouldn't have a business partnership, a friendship, or a romantic relationship with someone who's really negative, complete fixed mindset, just doesn't care, angry. You just that person wouldn't see you, you wouldn't see them, right? So typically, you're going to meet people, you're going to engage with people who are at least in the range of consciousness. And sometimes what will happen is sometimes anomalies will happen. Sometimes there's stuff that we have, old stuff, right? Baggage, pockets of consciousness. Sometimes the other way around. Sometimes there's like a higher level that we're ascending to, and we catch a glimpse of it depending on who we meet and who we connect with, right? And so this growth consciousness is a really big thing. If someone's not, I'll use the word conscious, and I think this word is a little bit of an abstract word sometimes, right? But I'll say if someone's not conscious in this way, again, doesn't pass the initial litmus test. Okay. Third thing, potential of co-creating. Now, I want to be very clear on this. Okay. This doesn't have to be long-term co-creation. Okay. It doesn't have to be business or a lifelong relationship or partnership. Not at all. Okay. One thing I learned, I believe in, what was it, 2024, which feels like it was a long time ago already. I'm recording this in spring of 2025, is testing things slowly, right? Baby stepping into relationships, whether that's business, friendships, romance. Baby stepping first, right? Just better for everyone because sometimes leaping in, not so good, right? So sometimes you got to untangle after that, right? Now, I'm not saying to not go all in on things. I think going all in once there's ample data, right? That it can be a wise decision. At the same time, testing slowly. So co-creating can be anything from an hour-long date where both people learn something and never see each other again, just because they, for whatever reason, right? It can be a lovely evening or a weekend or a trip together. Or it can be in a sense of business or co-creation with content, someone appearing on the other person's podcast. But that's co-creation potential, right? And as someone who enjoys creating, right, listening to this, that's probably you. I think co-creation potential is really powerful. It's a way to express ourselves with other people. And there's a number of different ways to do that. And this can extend into friendships, it can extend to business partnerships, romantic relationships, of course, at least seeing some potential for those two-way gives, right? When that's the case. So when I look at all my best friendships, all my best relationships, past, present, future, these are the three litmus tests of exploration. Okay. This is irrespective, like I mentioned, of longevity. Things can change by the seasons, right? I think a big mistake that people make is when all three of these are present, or whatever your big three litmus tests are, they get sometimes enamored or infatuated or really drawn in, which is great. I think it's can be very powerful. But I would say test slowly, right? I would say um, be open, but one thing I've learned is baby stepping it, right? Because this is the bare minimum. I want to be very clear. And I think when you look at things this intentionally, look at these as bare minimums. So understand whatever your bare minimums are. And this is me sharing mine. So my question for you, what if you only had to pick three? You don't have to have them be the same as mine. But if you look at, and I don't want you to make this, if you're going to do this exercise, I don't want you to do this based on theory. Okay. I want you to think about the best relationships in your life right now, or the best past relationships. What would those initial litmus tests be? And for me, what I'm sharing with you here is 100% across the board true. It's been true for the past several years. So I think it's important to start with these three. I think it also makes it easier to invest in the right people, the right relationships, and it's a way to still invest heavily and be present and involved, and at the same time to go slow and build off a strong foundation. Now, I will say, a lot of people talk about values, and I think that's a different topic, different video. I think a lot of people don't really understand what values mean. I think a lot of people will look at values as ideals, like courage, morality, all these different things. But to me, values have a lot to do with where we're spending our attention, right? So different topic, different time. These litmus tests are more encompassing of some of these things. And to me, having three simple ones, just when you see something that fits those, it at least creates intrigue. It at least gives you the green light to explore it a little bit further, okay, without having an attachment to it, without thinking that it's going to go any specific way, without making up stories, or just still being conscious and intentional, but it at least gives you the green light to explore further. It's sort of like, if you're about to get in a swimming pool, right? And you want to make sure what the water's clean. You want to make sure if you're going to go dive into the pool, if the water is deep enough. You want to make sure the water is warm or cold, depending on what your preferences are, right? You want to make sure that, I mean, those would be the three things. So same thing with these relationship litmus tests. Wanted to share that with you here because I think relationships are an area, and people, myself included, right? They can be very emotional, right? They can be very confusing. And having these three will significantly make navigating those waters easier for you and give you a sense of awareness and clarity. So write down what your three are, decide, and do your best to honor these. So my question for you, I'll leave you with that. Go ahead and do that. And look at once again the data. What's been your pattern of what's worked well, what hasn't, and chances are you'll find these three things, these three initial green lights that you can leverage.